right. Yep.
There we go. Great. Hopefully everyone can see my screen and everything. One of the things that I am just excited about is when it comes to understanding Six Sigma, oftentimes we think of Six Sigma in terms of manufacturing. We think of Six Sigma in terms of engineering logistics. And I remember several years ago, I was doing a training very similar to this. And a person asked me an interesting question. He said, well, Lyman, does Six Sigma work in service-based industries? Because everything I hear about has to deal with manufacturing, logistics, aeronautics, those engineering, those industries that are heavily statistic based. I'm just an HR professional. Would it work in my area? And that got me to really thinking about Six Sigma and how we can apply Six Sigma to the service industries. And so today, or this afternoon, whatever your time zone is I want to answer that question. But I'm challenged. I'm challenged with two things. Number one, I'm challenged with having a lot of content that I have to condense into a relatively short period of time. The second challenge that I have is that there may be a lot of questions about Six Sigma that this presentation may not answer your specific question. So please put your question in the chat and we will get to your question at the end of this presentation. And so think of this not as a presentation, but think of this as a conversation. We're sitting around the virtual dinner table and we're having a conversation about Six Sigma in a service-based industry. And so what are the objectives? As a result of this training, you will be able to understand, describe the Six Sigma DIMAC strategy. What does that mean? What is that roadmap? Understand the champion role in the Six Sigma initiative, as well as why it is extremely important to identify a project that you could apply Six Sigma to, even if you're not in the traditional industries, but you are in a service-based industry. And what I mean by a service-based industry is non-manufacturing, non-logistics, basically where the people or the product that you deal with is not something that you can package, all right? If you're in the people-facing business, if you are an accountant, if you are an attorney, if you are a social worker, if you are a human resources professional, a call center administrator, those are service-based industry where you provide a service and not necessarily a product, or you're in somewhat of a hybrid where maybe you provide a product, but also you have a service back end. And we want to talk about how you can apply it and assist in project management as well. And so just to give you sort of a breakdown, we're going to talk what is Six Sigma, go over the fundamentals, why use Six Sigma, what to consider when you think about putting together a Six Sigma product, and most importantly, what to avoid. What are the pitfalls? What are the traps? What are those things that make you go, I want to pull my hair out? Well, I don't have any hair, but if I did have hair, that would cause me to pull my hair out. And then we want to talk about what is a Six Light or a Six Sigma Light project, and are there merits to it? And so what's my story? You see, my story is like a lot of people. I was a high valued professional. What I mean by a high, went too fast here. What I mean by a high value professional, that I was sought by people from all over the world as a consultant, as a thought leader. And my to-do list was just filled with so many things that I needed a better way of organizing my day. My office was basically a mess, and I really didn't have a good system. And so when I began to look at different types of roadmaps, different types of modalities, I came across this concept of Six Sigma. And this was several years ago. And what I started doing, I started saying, okay, maybe if I could apply some of the Six Sigma or some of the lean strategies to my office, what would be the results? And let me tell you, it was amazing. Within 3 months, I was more organized. My productivity shot up through the roof. And I said, wow, I really like this Six Sigma. And I went through a certification process. I started out with the yellow belt. Then I went on and advanced and got my green belt, worked on about 15 or 20 projects. And then I went and got my black belt certification in Six Sigma. And now I am a master Six Sigma black belt. And I've helped literally hundreds of organizations all over the world to create a Six Sigma roadmap and how to apply it, especially in the service-based industry. And so majority, I would say 70 to 80% of my clients are not in manufacturing. They don't have a product. They are service-based industries. And that's where my expertise is helping service-based industry leaders to adopt a Six Sigma methodology or roadmap. And so basically, I felt like all I was doing was putting out fires. I was just putting out fires day in and day out. And so in essence, to be honest with you, if you notice from this graphic, the fire extinguisher is pointing at the flame and not at the base of the fire where it should be. And that's where a lot of us are at, especially those of us that are not Six Sigma experts, but are looking for a better way of managing the fires that pop up, these little small pop-up fires. And we're trying to prevent them from becoming an raging inferno. And Six Sigma, in my professional opinion, is one of the best systems out there to deal with what we call the root causes of the problem. So in other words, ladies and gentlemen, we are in a real crisis. And this is what I like. Michael Harry from Motorola put it this way. He said that if you cannot express what you know in numbers, that what makes it quantitative. Quantitative means it's numbers based, whereas qualitative is more subjective based, interview based. You don't know much about it. If you don't know much about it, then you cannot control it. And if you cannot control it, you are at the mercy of chance. And we do not want to be at the mercy of chance. We want to be able to identify a problem and be able to look at what are the root causes of that problem and apply some techniques to that problem so that we can understand it, we can control it, and we can sustain a solution to the problem that we solve. So you might be saying, well, Lyman, that's great. We heard a little bit about your bio, but really, dude, who are you? And why should I listen to you? Well, let me sum it up. This is my, I guess, bio in a nutshell. I am simply someone who is passionate about inspiring and helping HR professionals and other professionals to take action in resolving workplace issues. In other words, I am the person that you call in when you have problems. Not that I'm going to solve the problem, but I will help you strategize so that you are empowered to solve those problems. And so that's what gets me excited, is working with individuals from all over the world and helping them to create systems so that they can have sustainable results. Not these peaks and valleys where one day something works, the next week it falls off. But what if you could have sustained success in your operation? and you can identify and know what you need to do to maintain what we call that Six Sigma level. And we're going to talk more about that. So these are just some of my certifications. As I mentioned, I've done over, I think I've done close right now to probably about 380 or 385 Six Sigma projects over the years. So I've done quite a bit, and I've trained literally thousands of individuals on Six Sigma. You can Google me and you can see that a lot of associations such as this will have me to come in and train professionals, those that are Six Sigma professionals and those that are not, in understanding Six Sigma, the Six Sigma roadmap and the DMAC roadmap as well. And so there are some barriers, and I like to get the barriers out of the way. And so you might be asking yourself, well, Lyman, in your opinion, what are some of the top barriers to Six Sigma as it applies to the service industry? I am so glad you asked that question, and I'm going to answer it. Some of the top barriers is, number one, lack of management commitment. Management doesn't understand it. They think, like a lot of people, that Six Sigma really doesn't apply in the service industry. There's a lack of support from the team. In other words, they're overworked, they're stretched thin, and they don't have the sufficient resources. But I think the biggest one has to do with culture. And what I mean by culture is you may have individuals that say, well, I don't understand it, and they are resistant to change. They don't see the relevancy or the value of a Six Sigma program or project. There's a lack of interest, or it's just simply unknown. And then you have the question of duration. Well, how long does it take to implement a Six Sigma project from start to finish? And how often should you check, or how often should we be doing it? Is it something that we do once and forget about it? Or is it something that is continuous and ongoing? There's also process parameters. Well, Lyman, where does it start and where does it end? And is it time consuming? And also, we're not statisticians. We don't know how to collect the data. So as you can see, there are a number of barriers that people have when it comes to thinking about a Six Sigma. But we're going to bust through all of those barriers. Now let's talk about benefits. You know, talking about the problems or talking about the barriers is one thing, but I prefer, instead of talking about barriers and focusing in on the barriers or the obstacles, let's look at why. What are the top benefits of implementing a Six Sigma program or project within your organization? Number one, the applications are expressed in financial terms. So rather than statistics, you just apply dollars. As my friend said, if the dollars are right, then it makes sense. And this is a very practical, easy to use methodology that you can apply to even organizing your desk. Yes, you could even turn your desk into a Six Sigma project. It also reduces error. Let's say you run a payroll department or a mailroom. By applying that, you can reduce lag time. You can reduce the number of errors in getting the mail out on time or processing payroll or reports. Like I said, you can apply this to virtually any type of process that requires individuals to touch it. It is also best deployed for larger, complex technical problems. Now, I always would advise when I'm coaching or consulting is that the larger the problem is, the better it is to apply, especially if it's systemic. It's better to apply a Six Sigma methodology to it. Now, you can do what we call a Six Sigma Light and show you how to organize. And I have a couple of examples showing you how you can even organize a copy station as an example. But to get the full benefits that you can see dramatic results, it is best deployed for much larger, complex technical problems. But it also can improve customer satisfaction. And we're going to talk about a couple of tools, such as the voice of the customer and how you can get direct feedback from your customers to help you. And the most important, to reduce wait time. One of the biggest problems that people share with me is, Lyman, why does it take so long to get a decision? So when most people think of Six Sigma, they say, well, Six Sigma, what exactly does it mean? Sorry, my screen here is going a little crazy. What does that mean? And most people view Six Sigma as process management, flow. They see it as defining control processes. And so there are a lot of different definitions out there that when people think about Six Sigma, a lot of different things come to mind. But let me give you a real easy definition of what is meant by Six Sigma. Six Sigma is a systematic process of improvement to ensure excellence in future service delivery. Real simple. It is a systematic process of improvement to what? To ensure excellence in your service delivery in the future. And here's a couple examples of Six Sigma levels. For example, we talk about one, or Sigma level 1. Imagine if you had 1 million processes. In other words, you were running a line. Let's say you were processing 1 million pieces of mail, or 1 million paychecks, or you dealt with 1 million calls. It doesn't matter. But as an example, we're using the number of 1 million. One Six Sigma would mean that out of 1 million phone calls, there would be 690 drop calls or errors. Two Six Sigma would mean there would be 308,000. Well, let's go to 5. It's a lot better than 1, 2, 3, and 4. But even at 5, we're talking about 233 errors, whereas Six Sigma is 3.4 errors or defects per 1 million opportunities. And so when you think about it, as I use the example, if you had 1,600 pieces of mail that went out, that would mean that less than 1 would be delivered to the wrong address at the Six Sigma level. Paychecks, if there were 680 opportunities, we're talking about, again, less than 1 coworker or 1 employee would receive incorrect pay or not receive a paycheck at all. So think about it this way. Generally, Six Sigma is a problem-solving methodology that helps enhance business and organization operations. And so we talk about, in the service industry, we're looking at a rate of 70% or better. Because I understand what a lot of you probably thinking, like, wait a minute, Lyman, we don't have 1 million pieces of something. It would take us years, decades to produce 1 million paychecks. We just have a small operation. There's only 6 or 7 in my whole shop. How would Six Sigma work for me? Keep in mind, on the service side, we're talking about a 70% improvement or higher. So you could take as an example any number, okay, and you just apply 70%. What would be 70% improvement in this particular process? And that would get you within the range of Six Sigma. Understand, it is a data-driven problem-solving methodology to define, and we're gonna get into DMAT, which means we define a problem, we measure to see if it's a real or perceived problem, we analyze the results, we work towards improving those results, and then we set control measures in place. And so here's some real life examples of, let's say, if 99%, well, Lyman, 99% should be good. Is it? Well, let's look at it. While on the surface, the performance of Six Sigma may seem either unnecessary or a bridge too far, there are many businesses and services today that consistently perform above Six Sigma. But even at 99% quality, which is equivalent to a Sigma level of 3.8, there would be at least 200,000 wrong drug prescriptions per year. Wow, I don't know about you, but that doesn't sound too good. There would be 10 hours of unsafe drinking water each month. Just think about that. 10 hours a month, you couldn't drink the water. Or imagine flying and the airplane came in either too short or too long of a landing at one of the largest airports in the United States, O'Hara in Chicago, Illinois, or over 90,000 wrong felony convictions per year. What that means is 90,000 criminals released that should be in prison, or 90,000 innocent people wrongly convicted every year. So that's why it's important to think about not just 99% being good, but 99.99966 is great. And that's Six Sigma, or if you're in the service industry, a 70% or higher improvement rate. Again, do you want to have 20,000 lost articles of mail per hour? What about 5,000 incorrect or unnecessary surgeries per week? 200,000 wrong prescriptions per year, or 7 hours a month in the dark without any electricity? Whereas Six Sigma, or 99.99966, would only mean it's still, no one wants to have their mail lost. But when you look on the percentage, would you rather have 7 compared to 20,000? Or it would, no one wants to be that 1.7 who receives an incorrect surgery or unnecessary surgery. But again, it's better than 5,000. Or, trust me, no one wants to be the recipient of incorrect prescriptions. But again, a lot better than 200,000. So when we talk about Six Sigma, it's Six Sigma or higher. And so it's not just being happy with saying, well, there were 68 out of, all the prescriptions, we reduced from 200,000 incorrect to 68. We really would love for it to be 0, but we live in a real world and we understand that errors do happen. And so what we're dealing with is a major cultural change. And we're talking about moving from focusing on problem resolutions to preventing the causes, looking at what's the root causes, not just being reactionary when it comes to behaviors, but being proactive, looking at decision-making, not based on experience. In other words, people will say, well, Dr. Lyman has 20 years experience dealing with this issue. What Six Sigma is designed to do is to take the experience and say, okay, experience could be a qualifier. However, the basis of our decision must be data-driven. What does the data show? And that's where we base our decision, not on our opinion, not solely on our experience, but what does the data show? Also, it's not looking at, well, we will train employees if time permits, but mandating that people are constantly looking at how can they improve work performance? How can they increase their productivity? The other thing that I love about this is based on empowering teams, where it's not where just the supervisor has the responsibility, but everyone. You empower your organization, those that touch, those who handle that process, they are empowered to make decisions. And so moving again from symptoms to problem solving. And the other thing that I love about thinking about this transition is about intent. What is the intent of moving from where you're currently at to where you would like to go? And so let's talk a little bit about the Six Sigma project, the pre-Six Sigma project, and what's involved. There are different stakeholders, leadership, that's top management. They should be thoroughly involved. They should have a good understanding. What's a champion? A champion is someone who helps push your Six Sigma project through. And again, master black belt, that's for my level, who oversee other black belts. Green belts are the ones like the worker bees who actually do a lot of the hands-on work as well. And so the pieces must fit together to deliver business results as the organization develops a Six Sigma competencies. And so I talked a little bit about the champion, but a champion is that change management person that will help you kind of fight through those barriers. That champion also will help with communication, recognition, project selection. In addition to other management responsibilities, think of it this way. The champion is there to champion your cause. The champion is there to speak with other leaders and say, listen, this is a worthwhile cause. Now, here's some of the tools that you want to consider. The charter document sets the expectations, the boundaries. It builds your business case for your project. It also helps you to identify the resources that are necessary. It helps you set your goals, your targets. What are the financial benefits, the team resource, and also the project approval process. An approved charter ensures that your team sponsor and stakeholders have agreed up front on what should be done so that your project doesn't die on the vine. Trust me, I have seen too many projects start and they simply fizz out or die on the vine because they did not have a project charter that had been signed off from top management, executive, the leadership team. And it keeps everyone on track. It becomes like your marching orders. And so when you think about a project and the scope of the project, it focuses your attention on the boundaries and resources of the team so that you can focus in on where does the project begin, where does it end, what is outside the scope of this particular project, and what constraints or timelines must we work under. On the other hand, if the timeline is too narrow or the scope is too broad, it can end up in disappointing results. And what do I mean by the timeline is too narrow? If you're only given, let's say, 2 weeks to deal with a massive systems process error, okay? Let's say you're producing, every time you do payroll, there's about 15% errors. Well, that may not be something that you can fix in 1 week or 2 weeks. Something that's too broad is when you're trying to solve multiple problems as opposed to focusing in on one problem and addressing that and then moving on. Is what I call you focus on a problem, you prioritize what should you work on first, and then you use the DMAC to achieve success. So focus, prioritize, and then achieve. And then you have what's called the project plan. And again, it outlines what will be done, who's responsible, the different phases are on there, the activities, who's assigned, the start, end date, status updates. And so again, you now take the charter, which is very broad, and you begin to say exactly what is the plan, what's the benefits, what's the objective that we're looking for. Let's get into why we should even consider an HR, consider a Six Sigma, especially for HR. And so let's get into the roadmap, which is now the actual strategy. And so the DMAC basically is broken down into components, what we call the fundamentals of Six Sigma. And the first phase is the define phase. This is where you define what actually is the problem, and you identify the problem or the perceived problem, because you haven't tested to see if it's perceived or a real problem. Second is, how do we measure it? How do we identify the baseline criteria that's needed to see if it's actually a real problem or, again, a perceived problem? And the third phase, we analyze. This is we get more into looking at the relationships, the root causes, understanding the effects, as well as the effects of what we're doing, variability. And then we move into improvement, which is about how do we create a new and improved business processes and tolerance, key performance indicators, and then lastly, control. How do we maintain or sustain the level of Six Sigma, not just for 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, or 1 year? And so this gives you sort of a pictorial view of the increased productivity and different industries from 1992 with Motorola, IBM, Whirlpool, DuPont, all the way up to now the US Department of Defense, Robert Half, which in the United States is a large recruitment agency, banks such as Citigroup, Fifth Third Bank. So we've moved from 1992 with primarily being a manufacturing all the way up through, you name it, large organizations, hospitals using Six Sigma, banking industry. And so it's not just relegated to manufacturing as it started out in 1992. And so 90% of US businesses are service related, yet Six Sigma was originally developed for the manufacturing. I think I've stressed that point. If nothing else, you know that point. And so one of the first service industries to really look at Six Sigma was DuPont, Dow, and General Electric. And they were very successful in extending Six Sigma into the service industry. So since 2003, the majority of businesses using Six Sigma are now service related and are experiencing dramatic results by using Six Sigma. So it's not, again, just for manufacturing. And so I mentioned earlier, well, what are some of the projects that you might want to consider when thinking about a Six Sigma project if you're in the service industry? Compensation and benefits, payroll, doing job evaluation, leave eligibility, performance reviews. If you're looking at recruitment, absenteeism, conflict disputes, discipline, termination, redesigning how you, as an example, workflow, creating a streamlined workflow of how projects are managed. And so there's almost an endless list of possibilities when it comes to applying Six Sigmas. And so one of the biggest things we have to deal with is inefficiency. And I'm going to go real quick for sake of time. And some of the major things we have to consider is variation in process cycle times, waiting for customer information, creating bottlenecks, complex filing structure. Yes, you can even apply Six Sigma to filing information, filing reports, working even harder and not smarter. And so we have to develop success from failure. Dale Carnegie said that. And so again, why would we use Six Sigma, especially as human resources? Reduce lag time in processing, prevent bottlenecks, operation consistency, reduce error rates, and increase overall productivity. Now, a couple of categories that when we look at as far as called downtime plus A. And these are defects, overproduction, waiting, not utilizing people's talent, transporting inventory, motion. Other words, it takes too long to get from point A to point B, excess process and attitude. I'm gonna go very quickly. And so we talk about defects, we talk about errors, which creates rework. And here are some tools that we use: Pareto chart, 80-20 rule, proper feedback or creating a feedback loop, doing quick checks, training, overproduction, significant time on tasks that do not take precedence, not prioritizing the work. WIP stands for work in process. Everything's always in process. We haven't learned how to triage the work. Waiting is a big one. Non-value added time. Productive output is not being performed, which increase costs, lost capacity, bottlenecks, increased learning curve. And we want to be able to analyze the process steps by breaking them down, providing cross-training. Here's another one: not utilizing people's talent, higher skilled people performing low skilled tasks, not maximizing your organization's strength, and failing to cultivate staff ideas. In other words, not listening to people that work on that process day in and day out, where you think as the manager, all of the solutions come from you, not asking your team for their opinion, not understanding the voice of the customer, training development. You notice in most of these, you will see training. Training must become absolutely part of your culture. Transporting, poor office design, not accounting for work team or workflows, not properly leveraging technology, creating such as electronic documents, scanning of documents, which creates, again, long cycle times, increased cost, lost capacity, inventory, inboxes flowing over onto your desk, a backlog in your email inbox. Again, WIP, work in process, supply shortage. That's something I think the entire world is dealing with right now because of the pandemic, is that there is a supply shortage. Everything is stuck in the docks in California here in the US. And we want to be able to use what's called the 5S and visual management, how to triage or separate work, how to set performance goals. Motion. When we talk about motion, we're talking about where you're unable to find things. The best example is a person who loses his or her keys every morning because they are not in their proper place. Here's a rule that I have. Everything has a home or should have a home. And so that way you're not searching for things, or things are spread out so far. Forms, supplies are not centrally located. You're taking unnecessary trips to the printer, the copier. I know organizations where they had one centralized copier and it was on the third floor, and majority of people worked on the second and first floor. So imagine that. If I had to print out a report, I would have to take the stairs or wait for the elevator just to get a single piece of paper. Okay, so again, motion, extra processing, performing more work than is necessary, over documenting. More does not necessarily mean better. So keep that in mind. Sometimes we think the more we do, the better it is. Whereas sometimes it's better to have a very streamlined approach. Think about this. Attitude. And this is very powerful to talk about attitude, because when we talk about attitude, if you think you can or if you think you can't, both answers are right. I would say one of the biggest barriers to a successful Six Sigma is attitude, where people feel this won't work. We tried something like this before, and just negative. They're not open to change, and they fight you. They're resistant. So what should you consider? I think you need to have top-down support. You need to have a dedicated team that was willing to do the work. You need to figure out what are the parameters of selecting a project. Do you have a sufficient budget to complete the process once started? And who will lead and guide the process? I think these are key elements that needs to be considered. Now, what should we avoid? I think you need to avoid expecting huge results in a short period of time, and over-assessment of tasks. I mentioned this before, stick with one thing, but don't stay stuck in one phase too long. There has to be some movement. And I've seen people get stuck in the define phase and in the analyze phase, where they overanalyze things. They're trying to solve too many problems rather than what is the primary problem we're solving. Remember I said focus, prioritize so that you can achieve. So you have to focus your time and energy in solving one problem at a time, not trying to solve 10 problems at a time, but focus on one problem and prioritize. These are the things we're going to do so that you can have success. And another thing to avoid is not allowing the data to guide the process. Remember, Six Sigma is a data-driven process. And let's get into some of the components. And a couple of things we're going to talk about is resistance to change is best. I love this resistance change. I'll let you know where your resistance points are up front. And here's an example of a resistance change. Like, for example, is there resistance coming from the stakeholders, from management? Is there resistance coming from the employees? On this one, we're looking at a university. Also, another tool that I use is called SIPOC, which stands for Suppliers Input. You're going crazy here. Suppliers Input, Process, Output, Customer. And here's an example of one where you look at who are your suppliers, what do they supply, how is it processed, what's the result, which is the output, and again, does it apply to, and how you apply it to the customer. Here's an example of a SIPOC template where the suppliers was human resources, the input was the grievance or a complaint, the process was investigating the complaint, the output of the process was recommendations, resolutions, and then the customer was the employee themselves. And so once you map out your current process, a powerful tool is a SIPOC. And that's why I really believe that this tool, along with the resistance to change, is two of the most powerful tools that you can use in the design phase. Another one that I would say, if you had to pick, the top three would be resistance to change, SIPOC, and voice of the customer, because now you're getting direct feedback from your customer. But understand the voice of the customer is often full of emotion. We need to restate the customer statements into fact-based performance requirements that we need to focus on. Of course, customers, they do expect perfection. It's not good enough to say we're doing the best that we can. It's not good enough to say, well, you understand it's a pandemic and there are supply chain shortages. They don't want to hear that. They want to know, can you help me with the problem that I'm dealing with? A couple of behaviors that you would deal with, what's known as passive resistant behavior. These folks are kind of hard to read their position. They may follow you, but then they hide in the bushes. And what I mean by that is they appear, they give mouth or lip service that they are with you, but they work behind the scenes to sabotage what it is you're trying to do. So watch closely for these. They tend to get overlooked and can do some serious behind the scenes damage. You want to seek them out. They tend to believe no one is concerned with their thoughts about change. You want to engage them, empower them to express their position, work with them. You need to convert them. These are the passive. These are people that they've held an opinion. They know what's going wrong, but no one ever asks their opinion. So it's good to ask your team, what do you think? How do you feel we should approach this, rather than saying, this is what we're going to do, and I expect you to carry out these marching orders without getting their input. Now, the active resistant behavior is, these are ones that they will tell you what they believe. They will say, I don't think this will work. They're very active. They're very vocal in their resistance to change. And this is something called critical to quality. You want to figure out what exactly is critical to the quality. For example, in this example, what was critical was timely response to complaints. What was needed? Reduce the paperwork, consistent application, faster feedback. What was critical? Critical was training, punctual and timely, getting the work done on time, and making sure that employees was able to have a voice. How do you measure? And so whatever you do, remember, there's a desire, there's the needs, what's critical to quality, but then you have to figure out, how will I measure that? That's what makes it quantitative. Quantitative means that there is a measurement, that you're able to quantify or measure, so that you're not basing it on emotion, you're not basing it on your feeling, but you're basing it on what does the data show. And again, we're talking about moving to specifics. For example, interviewing customers, the use of the voice of the customers, the CTQ, a critical to quality gap analysis. And we want to determine the effort required for each project. And so again, we're going to go over some other tools. We'll be moving to, how do you measure? The best way to measure is using a survey design and a Pareto chart. Survey design is very, it may be based on a Likert scale. Asking, are you very satisfied, satisfied, neutral? Maybe they don't have an opinion, dissatisfied, or very satisfied. When we talk about a Pareto chart, when analyzing the data, we're talking about the frequency of problems or causes in the process. When there are many problems or causes, and you want to focus on the most significant, when analyzing a broad cause by looking at specific components. For an example, 80%, it's called the Pareto Rule. We've all heard of the 80-20 rule. 80% of customer complaints come from 20% of your product or services. 80% of delays in scheduling result from 20% of possible causes. 20% of your sales force produces 80% of a company's revenues, and 20% of system defects causes 80% of problems. And so that's why you want to look at the frequency. Check and investigate. What are the materials needed? What's the environment and the people? We're looking at defective, off speculation, contaminated, improper storage conditions, improper transportation or handling. When it comes to, if you're looking at materials, let's say you run a restaurant, you're looking at, spoilage. Why is the food spoiling? Equipment, the physical environment, temperature, lighting, security, safety, distractions in the environment, contamination. People, do we have the right levels of staffing? Are they able to get along? Are they in conflict? Do they have the physical and cognitive abilities to do the job? And again, poor repeatability, incorrect definition, talk about methods, machine and test, machine maintenance. So again, we want to check and investigate. So you're looking at what are some of the problems? Can you measure it? What is going to be the methods that you use to measure? And here's a couple of tools, process maps, the 5 whys, cause and effect diagrams to help analyze. Here's an example where you begin by looking at one process and you chart every step in that process. And you start with, okay, if this happens, what's next? And then what happens? Well, what if they say yes? What if they say no? So you may start out with 60, 70 different steps in a process, and now you want to be able to improve by 70% or cut 70% of those unnecessary steps out to reach Six Sigma. And so the 5 why process, it starts with identifying the problem. You identify the cause of the problem, and then you ask the question, why did this happen? You write down the response, or you diagram on a table, create a table or chart, and for each cause you ask, why did this happen? And you do it at least 5 times or enough to get to a logical cause of the root cause of that problem. And that's called a 5 why. And so you ask a question, say, well, why did this happen? Then you get an answer, say, so why do you think that happened? You get a response. And so as a simple example, you ask a person, I noticed that going back to payroll, that our payroll is having problems getting the payroll checks to the right people. Why do you think that's happened? Well, you might get the answer, well, it's because we're overworked, we're processing too much. Well, why do you think that happened? Well, we don't have the right people in place. They're all new. Well, why do you think that is? And the real problem might be they have an inefficient system or workflow, or they're handling pieces of paper too many times. That overproduction, as an example. You need to look at the root cause. Root cause achieved when we have identified the source of the problem. And one of the tools we just talked about was the 5 why approach. For any problem, there are typically many roots. They vary in frequency of occurrence. We need to know each root and their associated frequency. Well, how often does this happen? What's the impact of each of these roots? And provide an explanation. We must be able to explain how a change in one affects change on the other side. So if I do this, then what would that do over here? So it balances. So we want to have what's called a root cause validation summary. We list all the probable root causes. We rank them in terms of effect size. We determine the additional tests you plan to use to validate the factor X, which have the greatest effect on Y. We identify potential methods for controlling the factors which create the problem, and then we validate when it's complete, and we summarize all the selected root causes. And here's an example. It's called a fishbone, which is a process. We look at the cause, for example, low satisfaction, communication, trust, process gaps, environment. Communication, management was holding secrets. They didn't provide feedback to the employees. Their expectation was unclear. What was the trust? Well, there appeared to be favoritism. They were not always consistent. There were delays. No one was held accountable. The process, it was complex. There were long hold time. It was inflexible. It was very rigid. The environment, it's systemic problems, variable commitment. All this led to low customer satisfaction. And so while you identify 4 different routes, each one had a subcategory. It wasn't just communication, trust. Well, why communication? Management secret. Why trust? Favoritism. Why process gaps? Complexity. Why the environment? Verbal commitment, as an example. Let's talk about the improvement plan. And here's an example of an improvement plan where you have an action, who's responsible for the action, due dates, status, and when it's completed. And you just break down all the different steps and you assign it to someone who has that responsibility and is constantly following up. So where are we at, Barry, on the new complaint form? Well, the draft has been circulated. Great. When will it be completed? This was a couple of years ago, April of 19. You look at the meet to discuss the results. The results showed a 98% satisfaction rate. Wow, that's great. Well, when is the actual surveys due? 7 of 19. So now you take the results from the analysis phase and you put it into your improvement plan. Earlier, I talked about anything can be a 6 Sigma. Here's a simple one of a printer and supply. Whereas you can see here, everything is in one location, which is good, but there's no organization to it at all. And what you apply is the 5 S's. So first you want to do is you want to sort, determine what is really needed, so you can open up the space. Second, you want to set in order. You want to organize so there's a smooth flow to improve productivity. You want to make sure that things shine, that it's clean, well organized, standardized. You want to make sure that this is something that you repeat over and over again. There has to be some standardization to it so that it's not just random. So you monitor the first 3 steps and then you sustain awareness, stick to the rules. This requires a cultural shift. Remember I said earlier, going back to the person who constantly loses his or her keys, because everything should have a home. Everything on your desk should have a home. And you do it repeatedly until it becomes a habit and part of your culture. And here's an example of after applying the 5 S. Supplies with printer in use. Things are clearly labeled. So for example, if you have 3 different types of stationery, label so you know exactly where the stationery goes. And so this is a much easier, much functional process. Then we look at how 6 Sigma is implemented and applied will determine the results. We understand that if you look at a bell-shaped curve, you're going to have those, let's call on the outside, inferior or below average quality, above average, and excellence. And here's just an example. 30% is basically on that tail, unknown or less than 30%. Then you look at below average, may be known as 30% to 40%. Above average is that 40 to 60. Excellent is above that 60%. And so again, this just kind of gives you an idea of looking at a bell-shaped curve of where your process improvement should be. Don't have a lot of time really to talk about it. Also, we want to create an evaluation form based on what was the first root cause, the second root cause, what's the percent of the effect, estimated cost to fix the problem. There may be costs. You want to identify, maybe you need to purchase a new piece of software. Maybe you need to send people to a conference for training or bring in a trainer. You want to look at your risk, your priority, and validation. And again, you can use histograms. Here's an example. Remember we had that first complaint they had, I think it was like 68 steps to it. We streamlined it, made it very easy to understand from the employee, from the supervisor, from the union rep, from the HR rep, from payroll to central HR. So we were able to cut from 68 down to, I think this might be 12, 15 steps. Now we look at the control, a control plan, the before and after. And here's an example, measurement-based controls, creating dashboards, process flow diagrams, how do you test and inspect, schedule maintenance, incentives. I believe that you should have an incentive plan for those that are working on a Six Sigma project. Here's an example of a control plan where you look at the process steps, variable name, creating either new forms, image viewer, reports, how often is it measured, what type of measurement, are they visual measurements, process specification, what's your sample size, what's the frequency, how often will you observe this, as an example. And here's one of the before and after. Just to give you an example, before the project, it took 28 days to resolve a complaint. There were only 135 individuals trained. There was about 23 errors. The number of process steps was 63, and the cost was $59,748 that we were spending. After the project, we reduced from 23 days down to 10 days. We increased the number of staff that were trained from 135 to 578. We reduced the errors from 23 down to 2, and we cut the number of steps from 63 to 17, a 21.3% savings. The number of steps we reduced, remember, Six Sigma is 70% improvement or better. We exceeded that by 73%. We also reduced the number of errors by 91.3%, and we had a 328% increase in the number of training. Now, we didn't reach Six Sigma when it came to the number of days. It's still working on it, but it still is a lot better than 23 days. And the reason that it may be hard to get to Six Sigma because some of the cases just took a lot longer to deal with, especially dealing with sexual misconduct, theft, things of that nature, that is very difficult to do that. So it's always a work in process. And so the goal again, in a number of areas, they reached Six Sigma, and they're still working on reducing the number of days. You also create what's called a control chart for reducing cycle time. This is just a report that just kind of outlines what I had talked about. Ways to bust bottlenecks. And these are just some examples. Level loading, right people, right roles at the right time. It's important to shift workloads to level and expertise is most practically done. Another example is lead time goals. While managing the front door expectations are extremely effective. In other words, how much time do you need to really get the work done? You want to have that built in. Without setting these expectations, work tends to drag out. We begin to lose discipline. We think we still have plenty of time. So it's better to set those parameters of saying, how much time do we need? That's sort of like that learning curve to get started. And then you have what's called the post Six Sigma project. How do you close out the project? Determine what standardization opportunities are available, measure and communicate results of the project, the benefits and the savings. If you go back to that one slide, remember I had the cost savings of 21%. That's going to be important to your executive branch or your leadership team. So we've done this Six Sigma project what was the cost savings or benefits of doing this? How many people were you able to train? Remember, we went from 120 something to over 500 and something. And so you want to be able, when you close out your project, is to be able to show not just the results, but also in real numbers, what were the cost savings and the benefits of doing the project. Also, you want to think about, again, a Six Sigma light. And again, this is sort of like what I alluded to with the copier. It depends on the scope and scale of the project, how much time and research you have, how big is a problem. Big problems require more tools. So if you're just looking to organize your workflow, then just do a real small Six Sigma light type of project rather than a huge organization-wide project. And this is something you can do, like I said, organizing your office, making sure that your bookcase is within reach of, especially if you use like source materials, that you're not having to get up and walk way across the room to get things. And so it's all about how do you organize your work for efficiency. So there's no magic answer to solving problems. The answer will depend on the size and how deep you are willing to dig into the root cause of a problem. So don't get caught up into choosing one over the other, saying, wow, I don't know where to start. Just start. I suggest that you pull the tools which would give you an understanding of the problem and measure the significance of the problem, analyze your results, come up with a process or a proposed process of improvement to fix the problem, and once fixed, put controls in place for sustainability. Here are a number of references and books that I highly recommend, some websites. Manitap 17 is a great tool, but there's a number of them that's out there. And at this time, I turn it back over and open up for any questions. I know I went extremely fast, but if there's any questions, be more than happy